A German shepherd pup stumbled from the rain-drenched darkness, shivering beneath a mountain porch. He was a secret the storm tried to keep. The man who pulled him from the mire was a Marine lost on the road back to himself. Weeks would pass. Sirens screamed through the Bozeman woods. A 7-year-old boy had vanished. No one noticed the pup melt into the pines or believed he could ever find his way home. But he held the scent of the one who saved him a lesson in loyalty he would never forget. Their story will break your heart and restore your faith in second chances. But first, let me know where you're joining us from. Put your country down in the comments. And if you believe no soul, human or animal, should ever be left behind, make sure you subscribe. The storm broke violently over Bozeman, Montana, twisting pines into quaking silhouettes and turning dirt roads to churning brown rivers. It was the kind of high-country deluge that swallowed all other sound, the kind that left the world feeling profoundly empty, yet terribly alive. Inside a small cabin nestled on the slope, Ethan Ward kept vigil by the window. His elbows braced on his knees, one lone lamp casting a stark glow on the cabin's log walls. Ethan, a 36-year-old United States Marine, had come home just 3 weeks before. He wore the expression of a man still wired for combat, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped brown hair and serene gray eyes that held the ghosts of all he'd witnessed. His face was clean-shaven, etched with faint scars along his jaw. The face of a man accustomed to command, but a stranger to peace. The quiet of civilian life chafed like a uniform that no longer fit. He had chosen this solitude in the cabin his father's hands had raised, hoping these mountains could teach him how to be still. Outside, thunder tore the sky apart. Ethan stood checking the wood stove, then poured a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. He'd meant to spend the night writing an application to rejoin the Corps as a training officer. He hadn't managed to write a single word. The drumming of rain on the tin roof had pulled him back to another place, back to Afghanistan. The hiss of sand on steel, the ragged breathing of men just waiting for the sun to rise. And then he heard it a cry. At first, just the wind keening through the pines, but it came again. Thin, high-pitched and shattered, not human, not quite animal. It was the sound of pure desperation. He froze, his cup suspended mid-air. His instincts, forged in years of war, flared to life. He set the mug down, snatching his flashlight and a rain jacket, jammed on his boots and plunged into the storm. The rain struck him like icy needles as he moved off the porch, his flashlight beam cutting across a yard where puddles shimmered like black oil. The cry pierced through the downpour, closer now. Ethan knelt by the cabin's edge, the light shaking on the wooden planks. And then he saw him, a little German shepherd puppy, no more than 4 months old, huddled beneath the porch stairs. The tiny pup was soaked to the bone, his fur matted with heavy rainwater, his paws lost in the thick mud. His oversized ears twitched with every rumble of thunder. You could see the poor animal's ribs through his thin coat. He breathed in short, panicked gasps. His light amber eyes were clouded with terror, meeting his gaze for a second before looking away. Ethan's voice softened the way a soldier speaks to a terrified new recruit. "Dento. Easy now, buddy. You're okay." He got down lower, extending a slow hand beneath the porch. The puppy remained frozen. He let out another whimper, a sound so fragile the storm almost swallowed it. Ethan waited. War had taught him patience. "Don't move. Don't decide." Inch by cautious inch, the small creature crept closer until its wet nose brushed against his hand. Cold, trembling. Alive. He gently lifted the pup, pressing it to his chest beneath his dripping jacket. There was no resistance. It just collapsed into him, the fight completely gone. Ethan felt the desperate flutter of its heartbeat. Frantic and fading, he whispered, "I got you. You're safe now." A promise he wasn't sure was for the dog or for himself. Inside, he kicked off his boots and set the puppy on an old rag near the stove. The first hints of warmth began to crawl across the floor. As the fire roared back to life, Ethan shed his wet jacket, wrapping the shivering pup inside its folds. He watched its small body rise and fall in a shallow rhythm, noting the mud caked between its pads. A faint scar on one ear, a swollen tick behind its neck. "Damn," he muttered. "You've been through it." The cabin smelled of burning pine and the wet earth outside. Ethan fetched a bowl of water, but the puppy just sniffed it weakly. It struggled to stand, slipped, and let out a tiny, pitiful yelp. He knelt down, resting a hand on its back, feeling the tremor of a tiny whimper. "Easy now," he said softly. "Not yet. Just breathe." A blinking light on the counter caught his eye. He picked up the phone and dialed the local animal rescue. A small outfit run from the Bozeman Valley. A woman's voice, weary but kind, answered, "Animal Rescue Bozeman, how can I help you?" "My name is Ethan Ward. I found a German Shepherd puppy near my cabin. It's soaked freezing. Breathing, but just barely. How long was it in the rain?" "Don't know. Long enough to be on its way out." A pause on her end. "We can't get anyone out there tonight. The roads are completely washed out. Your job is to keep it warm. No food, you understand. Just warmth. If that pup makes it to morning, we'll have a vet there first thing." Her voice dropped. "And if it doesn't, well, at least it won't be alone when it goes." The line went dead. Ethan stared at the silent phone for a long moment before his eyes drifted back to the small heap by the stove. Her words landed with a weight he hadn't expected. He went and got a blanket, his old marine fleece, the one that still carried the faint scent of desert sand and gun oil. He wrapped the pup in it, then sat on the floor beside it, his back against the wall. His legs stretched out. The storm raged on, hammering the roof. Each thunderclap rattled the windows. But inside, the little creature was still. Its breathing evened out, shallow, but it was there. And Ethan watched. His eyes were locked on the rise and fall of that tiny chest. He thought of the brothers he couldn't save, of other nights spent just like this, listening to a man breathe until dawn, praying that the next breath would come. He reached out, resting a single finger on the puppy's head. "You made it this far, little soldier. Just keep breathing." The hours crawled by. The fire dwindled to almost nothing, just the embers glowing red. Ethan dozed, sitting up, hands resting near the dog. Sometime before dawn, the hard rain finally softened, the storm fading to a mere whisper. The first hint of gray light was touching the window pane when he finally stirred. The puppy wasn't shivering anymore. It had curled up against his side, its head on his thigh, its breathing now deep and steady. A faint smile touched Ethan's lips, the first one in months. "Tough little fighter, aren't you?" he murmured. Outside the window, the mountains emerged from the mist washed clean by the night storm. The scent of wet pine drifted through the cracked open window. For the first time since leaving the Corps, Ethan felt something besides the familiar hollowness. He didn't know it yet, but that one cry which tore through the storm's rage became the first thread of a lifeline pulling him back to the world. He looked down at the tiny creature, its fur drying into soft waves of dark sable and tan. "You and me," he whispered. "Guess we both got caught out in the storm." The puppy stirred, stretching a single paw before settling again. Ethan adjusted the blanket, fed the dying fire another log, and sagged back against the rough-hewn wall. The last of the thunder rolled away beyond the hills, replaced by the steady, quiet beat of rain dripping from the eaves. And in that rhythm, two heartbeats found the same cadence. The soldier and the stray, both too stubborn to die, both learning all over again what it meant to just stay alive. Morning crept slowly over Bozeman. A low fog clung to the valley floor. The heavy scent of wet pine filled the air. The storm had finally broken in the night, leaving the mountains silent and silver under a pale, washed-out sky. Inside the cabin, the fire was nothing but glowing coals. Ethan Ward stirred his back, screaming from a night spent upright against the wall. The first thing his eyes found was the small knot of fur pressed against his leg. The German Shepherd puppy was alive. Ethan exhaled long and slow. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. The pup's small chest rose and fell with a calm, steady rhythm. Its fur, once matted with rain, had dried into uneven tufts of sable and tan. When a sliver of light touched its face, the creature blinked, two amber eyes opening slowly, full of uncertainty, but undeniably alert. "Hey there," Ethan murmured, his voice a rough gravel. The puppy's ears twitched at the vibration. It tried to lift its wobbly head. "You made it," he managed a faint smile. The simple fact of watching something cling to life felt like a hard-won battle. He poured some water into a bowl, making sure it was warm, and crouched down beside the dog. It sniffed hesitant before lapping weakly at the water. That sound, the soft, persistent rhythm of survival, began to fill the cabin's dead silence. Ethan watched, every movement terrified it might fade away if he looked away. When the bowl was finally empty, he just sat there on the floor, elbows on his knees, studying the animal. "You're gonna need a name," he said quietly. The pup tilted its head as if it understood. A memory flared sand smoke, a base in Helmand province. The dog that had saved his life, a canine named Rex, taken by shrapnel 3 years earlier. He had buried Rex with his own 2 hands, shaking the desert wind, whipping away his final words. "Good boy, you did good." The Marine inside him despised the sentiment, but the man who came home couldn't stop it. "Rex," he said softly, and the name settled in the quiet room like a vow. The puppy blinked, then sneezed, shaking its head as if to reject the formality. Ethan laughed, a harsh, rusty sound from deep in his chest. "Yeah, you're going to be trouble." By noon, sunlight was finally streaming through the windows. The sound of an approaching truck echoed in the trees, the slow crunch of heavy wheels on wet gravel. Ethan looked up from the stove where he was frying eggs. Rex, who was near the hearth, instantly perked his ears on alert. A knock came sharp and deliberate. Ethan pulled the door open to find a woman standing on his porch, a rescue worker from the local shelter. She was in her early 40s, of average height, with weathered hands and eyes the color of gray-blue mountain ice. Her name, Sarah Collins, was stitched neatly on her jacket. She had the look of someone who had seen too many discarded animals and far too few good owners. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back under a cap, and her voice, when she finally spoke, her voice was steady yet gentle. "Mr. Ward, I'm with Bozeman Animal Rescue. You called us last night." "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice low as he stepped back from the door. "Come on in." Sarah stepped inside, her professional gaze sweeping the cabin's interior. "That storm, it was a bad one," she said, setting her clipboard down. "It stranded half the valley. The little fella is lucky he made it." Ethan just nodded, his gaze shifting toward the fire. Rex was perched by the hearth. Ears pricked tail, still his eyes locked on the stranger. Sarah knelt, her movements slow but sure. "Well, hello there," she murmured softly. "Aren't you just a handsome boy?" She extended a hand slowly. Rex leaned forward, sniffing the air with caution. When her fingers brushed his coat, he flinched a tiny shudder, but held his ground. "He's dehydrated thin, maybe 4 months old," she assessed, her fingers gently tracing the space behind his ears. "Probably dumped after hunting season. It happens more than you'd think." Ethan's arms tightened across his chest. "So you're taking him?" The question hung in the air. Sarah paused, her gaze softening. "That's the plan. We need to get him to the rehab shelter. The vets will get him cleaned up, put some weight on him. After that, we find him a new home." At her words, Rex's small frame went rigid. He shuffled back until he pressed against Ethan's boot, letting out a low, trembling whine. Sarah stopped watching. Ethan sank to one knee beside him, placing a steadying hand on the pup's back. "So, easy now," he whispered the words, barely audible. Rex leaned into his touch. Sarah let out a soft sigh. "Seems he's already made his choice." Ethan's eyes met hers. "What are the chances he'd even remember this place if you took him?" A small, weary smile touched her lips. Not likely. They adapt fast, especially this young. Still, it's a better fate than freezing out there. He hesitated. What if I kept him? Just for a little while until he's stronger. Her eyebrows lifted. Legally, he's a rescue intake. But her gaze drifted around the small cabin, at its clean, quiet order, a military precision in every last corner. She studied the man before her, his posture straight, weathered his eyes steady but haunted by a deep weariness. You were in the service, weren't you? Was, Ethan said simply. She nodded slowly. I figured. My brother's Navy. Had a shepherd, too. Wouldn't let that dog out of his sight after his tour. Her gaze fell back to Rex, then she exhaled. All right, Mr. Ward. 2 weeks. I'll mark it as a temporary foster. You'll need to check in every 3 days. Any sign of aggression or illness, you call me immediately. If you can't handle it, I'll come get him myself. Deal? Deal, Ethan confirmed. Sarah jotted a note on her clipboard, tore off the form, and passed it to him. Name Rex. She smiled faintly. A strong name. As she rose to her feet, Rex's eyes tracked her every movement. Sarah gave Ethan one final searching look. You're doing a good thing. Just remember, sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let go. Ethan offered no reply. He watched her climb into the truck, the crunch of tires on gravel the only sound, until it was swallowed by the forest road. When the silence returned, Rex padded to the door, his tail flicking with a nervous energy. Ethan crouched down, resting a hand on his head. She's gone, kid. It's just us now. The pup's ears drooped as if he understood. Afternoon light stretched long through the windows. Ethan spent the better part of an hour fashioning a small bed near the stove from an old duffel bag and a worn blanket. Rex circled the makeshift bed twice, sniffed it carefully, then curled up, tucking his paws beneath him with a deep sigh of relief. Ethan watched him for what felt like a long time. Something deep in his chest uncoiled a knot he hadn't known he'd carried for years. That evening, as twilight settled over the valley and the air filled with the hum of crickets, he sat on the porch with a mug of coffee. Rex padded out beside him, his nose testing the damp night air, his ears twitching at every sound that echoed from the darkening woods. The deluge had scoured the landscape clean. Below them the forest shimmered in the haze of a world reborn. Ethan settled back, the weathered timbers groaning under his weight. You know, Rex, he murmured, his voice low. Maybe you're the one saving me. The puppy turned, cocked his head, then leaned his small body against Ethan's worn boot. Indoors, the fire crackled a warm, constant heartbeat. The night felt still once more, as though the tempest had never raged. But Ethan knew the truth. Storms leave scars, some on the surface, others buried deep inside. And sometimes when the fighting is over, something new can finally begin. The first dawn after Sarah's visit broke clear and utterly still. Like spun glass frost clung to every pine needle, and the air held a biting metallic chill that could only be forged in the heart of Montana. Inside the cabin, Rex was awake long before Ethan. The small pup was a silhouette sitting sentinel at the window, watching dawn's first light bleed across the tree line. His ears, still comically large for his frame, twitched with every whisper. His coat, now clean and groomed, revealed deep hues of black and bronze in a sliver of sunlight. Ethan watched from his chair, a coffee mug cradled in his hands. He'd planned on drinking in silence, but watching the pup stare so intensely at the world beyond the glass awoke something dormant within him. "Missing the wild, are you, boy?" he asked gently. Rex turned his tail, giving a single soft thump against the floorboards before curling beside the chair. The days that followed fell into a quiet, healing rhythm. Each morning, Ethan would split firewood, the sharp crack of the axe echoing. Afternoons spent wrestling with his old truck's engine, and he mended a leaking gutter as the snowmelt began its steady drip. And wherever he went, Rex followed a steadfast shadow at his heels. A sharp whistle and the dog was there. A quiet word, "stay," and Rex would freeze a statue of devotion. His amber eyes were locked on Ethan with an unnerving intensity. The Marine inside him respected the obedience, but the man was humbled by the trust. "You're a quick learner," he would mutter after a perfectly executed command. Rex would simply tilt his head, panting softly, his entire being anticipating the praise Ethan found he could no longer deny. That week, a few familiar faces broke the silence of Ethan's world. On Thursday morning, Tom Weaver, his neighbor from 2 miles down the ridge, pulled up to deliver his mail. Tom was in his 50s, built low and broad-shouldered, a retired forester whose skin was as weathered as old bark. His voice was a familiar blend of rough humor and caution. He was a man who liked everyone, but trusted almost no one. "You're back early this season," Tom observed, swinging out of his truck. "Heard you found yourself a new partner." Ethan offered a faint smirk. "You mean him?" He nodded toward Rex, sitting alert on the porch steps. Tom let out a low whistle. "That's a fine-looking shepherd. What are you training him for?" "Just trying to train each other to behave," Ethan replied. Tom chuckled, his eyes knowing. "Be careful. Those rescued ones, they remember the hard times. Takes a hell of a lot of patience." Ethan's gaze fell to Rex, who was cautiously sniffing Tom's boots but keeping his distance. "We've both had plenty of practice with that," he said quietly. Tom lingered for a few more minutes, left a small bag of jerky for the dog, and then drove off with a simple wave. After the truck vanished, Rex trotted to the end of the driveway, his nose to the wind, his tail giving one deliberate wag before he sat. As Ethan watched the animal, a familiar ache settled in his chest that had nothing to do with being alone. It was recognition. That night the nightmares returned, only this time they weren't his. They were Rex's. Around midnight, Ethan was jolted awake by faint whimpers. The dog was twitching violently in his sleep, his paws churning against the blanket, tiny choked yelps escaping his shallow breaths. Ethan reached out, placing a hand on the pup's trembling shoulder. "Ugh! It's all right, boy," he murmured into the dark. "You're safe now." Rex stirred, pressing closer, and the terrible sounds faded into silence. Ethan stayed with him until dawn, listening as their heartbeats slowed. 3 days later, the rescue center called. And it was that same calm voice, Sarah's, crackling through the line. "How's our patient doing?" she asked. Ethan glanced over at Rex, who was working on an old glove. "Strong," he said. "Eats like a Marine, sleeps like one too." Sarah laughed softly. "No aggression, none. He's just cautious, that's all." "That's good," she said, her voice softening. "Just remember, sometimes they're calm right before their instincts emerge. Be ready for changes." Ethan managed a faint smile. "If loyalty is an instinct, I'll take my chances." After the call, he caught his own reflection in the window. For the first time in months, his eyes were not completely empty. In the days that followed, Ethan started taking Rex past the property line. The forest trail snaked behind the cabin, cutting through spruce and cedar until it opened to a clearing where elk would sometimes graze. The puppy's paws sank into the soft dirt as he bounded ahead, checking back every few feet to make sure Ethan followed. When Ethan whistled, Rex raced back, stopping perfectly at his boot. This was no longer just training. It was a bond. One morning, Ethan encountered a stranger on that path. Claire Donovan, a wildlife photographer who had recently rented a cabin down the valley, stepped out from the trees, camera slung around her neck. She was in her early 30s, with dark, wavy hair tucked under a gray knit cap, a faint scar along her cheek that didn't dull her quiet beauty. She moved with a quiet confidence, the kind of person who preferred observing life rather than being a part of it. "Morning," she said, her tone friendly, but measured her breath, fogging in the cold. "Morning," Ethan replied. Rex stood at his side, tail high but still. She nodded at the pup. "Yours?" "Temporary," Ethan said. Claire smiled faintly. "Aren't they all until they're not?" She crouched slowly. Rex sniffed her glove, then gave it one lick, surprising them both. "He's discerning," she observed. "Doesn't greet strangers easily." "Neither do I," Ethan admitted. They spoke briefly about the forecast for snow, about the wildlife moving down through the valley. Then Claire nodded to the trail. "See you around, Marine." Ethan blinked. "How did you know?" "The haircut, the boots, the posture," she said, half smiling as she disappeared. Once she was gone, Rex barked, his tail wagging. Don't you start," Ethan muttered, but he couldn't fight the grin. That night, sitting by the fire, he scratched gently behind Rex's ears. "Do you think she's right that you're not temporary?" The pup looked up, his eyes glimmering in the firelight, and rested his head on Ethan's knee. "Yeah," Ethan whispered softly. "Didn't think so." The second week came faster than he'd expected. Rex was growing his steps, sure, his bark deeper. He had learned the basic commands: sit, stay, come. But what amazed Ethan wasn't the obedience, it was the awareness. When Ethan moved quietly, Rex followed without sound. When Ethan tensed at a sudden sound, the dog was an instant mirror of him, head up, body alert. It was as if the animal could read the very rhythm of his pulse. On the 13th night, as snow began to fall again, Ethan sat by the window, writing in a small notebook he hadn't opened since deployment. The words came slow, but they were steady. Outside, the world turned white flakes, swirling in the porch light's glow. Rex lay curled at his feet, his tail twitching in sleep. Ethan paused, his eyes on the small creature who'd entered his storm, and stayed. 2 weeks, he whispered. "Feels like a lifetime." Sarah's warning about the word temporary haunted him. Nothing about this felt temporary. The fire crackled against the howl of a distant coyote. Rex's head shot up, his ears pricked and alert, then softened as Ethan's hand brushed his back. "It's okay," Ethan said quietly. "You're home now." And for the first time since the war, he actually believed it. By the third week, the mountain air was sharp again, dry and cold beneath a weak February sun. The snow had thinned to icy patches, and the ground crackled with every step. Life in the cabin had settled into a quiet rhythm. Firewood stacked high, the truck's engine finally turning over, and the days now punctuated by the barks of a pup who was growing stronger than Ethan had anticipated. Rex was no longer that shivering thing he had pulled from under the porch. His body had filled out hard muscle under a thickening coat of black and bronze. His eyes, once timid, now burned with a bright, focused awareness, always scanning, always on guard. He followed Ethan's every movement, a silent shadow that had learned the language of the man's gait, his tone, his stillness. At 4 months old, the pup possessed the raw discipline of an animal bred for duty. That morning, Ethan stepped outside with his coffee. The valley stretched out in muted tones of blue and white smoke, spiraling from chimneys far below. A red mail jeep crawled up the winding road. Mark Daniels, the mail carrier, an old acquaintance from town, was making his rounds. Mark was in his mid-40s, tall and wiry, his face ruddy from a lifetime of brutal Montana winters. He was known for his bad jokes, which he collected in a small notebook, convinced of his future fame. He waved as his jeep crunched to a halt. "Morning, soldier. Brought you your bills. Maybe something better if the universe is feeling generous." Ethan managed a faint smile, taking the mail. "You're early." "Storm's moving in tomorrow. Trying to get ahead of it," Mark said, his breath a white cloud in the cold. Before Ethan could respond, a vicious bark tore through the mountain air. It was pure instinct. Rex launched himself off the porch, fur bristling and teeth bared. Mark stumbled back, his eyes wide. "Whoa, easy there." Big guy Rex stay Ethan's command cut through the tension like a knife. The dog froze mid-lunge, tail stiff, chest heaving. His gaze fixed on Mark, but his paws rooted to the frozen ground. Ethan knelt, his hand finding the dog's collar. "It's all right. He's a friend." Rex's frantic breathing slowed. After a tense moment, he lowered his head with a soft whine, his ears folding back. Mark let out a shaky laugh. "Geez, he's got a hell of a bark. Thought I was about to lose an ankle." He's learning," Ethan said quietly, still figuring out who's a threat. "Smart dog," Mark said, stepping closer, "but much slower this time." "Maybe too smart." He held out a small box. Package from the rescue. Probably his papers. Take care of that little soldier of yours. Ethan nodded as Rex watched the jeep retreat down the long ridge. When the sound of the engine finally died, the dog moved to Ethan's side and nudged his hand in unspoken apology. Ethan smiled for real. You're just doing your job. That afternoon, Ethan decided Rex was ready for a real workout. He found a clear patch behind the cabin and started his old Marine routine. Push-ups, sprints, burpees. Rex watched every single move, circling him, his tail a joyful blur with barks of encouragement. You want to join? Ethan teased, tossing a stick far. Rex exploded after it, a clumsy but graceful leap returning with his prize held proudly in his jaws. They played until they both were panting. When Ethan paused to stretch, Rex went rigid, his ears locked on the tree line. His body went taut. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Ethan followed his stare. There between the trees, a figure stirred. A young gray wolf, gaunt from hunger, its ribs sharp beneath its fur. Its golden eyes met Ethan's for a heart-stopping second, then fixed on the dog. Easy boy, Ethan whispered, his hand lowering gently to Rex's back. But the shepherd was already on his feet, stance rigid, tail held high. He didn't lunge, just planted himself squarely between Ethan and the wolf. His shoulders were braced, his teeth bared, in a silent warning. The wolf faltered, circled once, and then retreated. Rex didn't chase. He just growled until the shadow dissolved into the trees. Ethan breathed out. That's enough, he said, kneeling down to meet the dog's intense eyes. Rex's fur was still raised, but his gaze softened as Ethan's hand brushed his head. You didn't fight. You just held your ground. For the rest of the day, Rex remained closer than ever. If Ethan moved to the porch, he was a shadow. If Ethan sat to eat, Rex lay at his feet, eyes half-lidded but his ears ever watchful. That night, when the wind rose again, the dog chose the floor by the door. His body coiled like a sentry guarding the threshold. Later, as Ethan cleaned the last of the dinner dishes, the phone rang. It was Sarah Collins. Her voice was that familiar mix of official discipline and deep empathy. Just checking in, Mr. Ward. How's our patient? Healthy, Ethan said. Strong. Maybe too strong, Sarah chuckled. That's a good problem to have. He's protective, Ethan added. Almost went after my mailman. That's the shepherd in him, she explained. They bond hard once they trust someone. Sometimes a little too hard. Her tone grew gentler. Just remember, he's still learning the world isn't out to hurt him. Ethan glanced toward the sleeping dog by the door. You're not wrong, he murmured into the phone. Sarah hesitated. You sound different. You know, lighter. He managed a faint smile. Guess he's rubbing off on me. After the call, Ethan stepped outside one final time. The night sky stretched out endlessly, stars flickering like chips of cold fire. The snow had returned, falling light and steady. Rex padded out beside him, settling so close that their shoulders were touching. Ethan stared into the forest where the wolf had disappeared. You didn't have to protect me, he said softly. But you did. Rex turned his head, pressing it against Ethan's arm. Then his gaze returned to the trees as if standing watch. For a long, quiet time, they stood there, soldier and dog, both comfortable in silence, both shaped by things they would never speak of. When Ethan finally went back inside, Rex followed, pausing only for one final glance into the dark ears pricked, heart steady. Inside, the fire hummed low, throwing shadows that flickered like a half-forgotten memory. Ethan lay back on the couch, closing his eyes as the weight of exhaustion settled in. Before sleep took him, he heard the faint scrape of claws on wood, the sound of Rex repositioning himself by the window, keeping his guard. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines, but the cabin stayed warm. Whatever ghosts haunted the man or the animal, they seemed for now to be at peace. Bozeman's winter had turned unforgiving again. It was the kind of morning where the sun rose pale, offering light but no real warmth. Down in the valley, the small town lived on whispers. In the aisles of their grocery store, over coffee at the diner, people spoke of the Marine and his wild dog up on the mountain. Some swore the animal was dangerous, that it had the eyes of a wolf. Others whispered that Ethan Ward was losing himself up there all alone. In a town like Bozeman, rumors were the only currency that mattered, and this story was spreading like wildfire. That afternoon, Ethan was splitting logs when the sharp crunch of tires on frozen gravel cut through the silence. A black police SUV rolled to a stop at the end of his drive. A door opened, and a tall man emerged, his badge glinting dully under the pale sun, a stark figure in a Navy duty jacket. Lieutenant Luke Carter, in his early 40s, moved with the quiet precision of a man who had spent his entire life in a uniform. Broad-shouldered and clean-shaven with close-cropped blonde hair and sharp blue-gray eyes, there was an unshakable solidness to him, the kind of stillness that only veterans seem to carry. Ethan slowly straightened up, wiping the grit from his hands onto his jeans. "Afternoon, officer," Ethan said. "Lieutenant Carter?" The man answered, his tone formal but not aggressive. "You must be Ward." "That's me. I hear you're keeping a dog up here. Mind if I have a look?" Ethan's brow tightened. "Is there some kind of problem?" Luke took a deliberate step forward. "Got a few calls from folks in town. Concerns about an unlicensed rescue animal. My job is to make sure everything's on the level." But before Ethan could respond, a low growl rumbled from the porch. Rex stood there, tail rigid, head low. His coat shone in the flat light, a world away from the frail pup he'd been just a month ago. Now a young German shepherd, powerful and watchful. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured. Luke froze in his tracks, keeping his hands visible, his voice steady. "That him?" "That's Rex." "He's a beautiful animal," Luke said quietly, his eyes taking him in. "Looks to be about 6 months old." "Close enough." The lieutenant's expression hardened, shifting from admiration back to duty. "Mr. Ward, do you have a rehabilitation or wildlife permit for him?" Ethan hesitated. "Not yet. I'm working on it." "That's going to be a problem," Luke stated plainly. "State law requires authorization for any unregistered rescue. If something were to go wrong..." "Nah. If that animal hurts somebody, it's all on you." Rex growled again, not a bark, but a deep vibration that seemed to shake the cold air. Luke's hand twitched instinctively toward his belt, but he held it there. Ethan moved to stand between them, a solid wall. "Then, he won't hurt anyone. He's trained. He's loyal." Luke's gaze met his unwavering. "Loyalty isn't the issue here. Liability is." The silence stretched between them, heavy and cold. "Give me 2 weeks," Ethan finally said. "I'll have the paperwork, the vet check everything." Luke held his gaze for a long moment, then glanced at Rex, who remained a fixed statue. His eyes locked on the stranger. The lieutenant's jaw tightened, and then it eased. 2 weeks, Marine. You keep him under control. Don't give anyone a reason to call me out here again." Ethan gave a single sharp nod. "Understood?" Luke pulled a small card from his jacket. "If you need help with the forms, call the county office. They'll walk you through it." He paused, his tone softening just a fraction. "You served 13 years. 3rd Battalion Marines. I was Army myself." Luke added, "Kandahar, 2009. The words hung in the air, earning a quiet nod of respect. It was a language they both understood. Luke gave Rex one last look. "You've got a hell of a partner there. Don't you let the paperwork take him from you." As the SUV vanished down the winding trail, Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Rex trotted to his side, pressing his head hard against Ethan's leg. "You did good, boy." Ethan murmured, his voice a low rasp. "But next time I'll do the talking for us." That night the cabin was an island of dim, lantern-lit warmth. Paperwork had invaded the kitchen table, a sea of state forms, permit applications, and animal care regulations. Ethan was hunched over them, his pen moving with a slow, deliberate weight. His sharp, blocky script, the handwriting of a soldier, filled one line after another. At his feet, Rex lay curled, his head resting on a paw. Every so often, his gaze would lift to Ethan, a silent check-in, before his head settled again, content just to be near. Outside, the wind grieved against the window panes, and from the deep woods a lone owl cried out. Ethan wrote on his hand, cramping, his eyes burning with exhaustion. But he wouldn't stop. For the first time in years, he had a mission, not for a flag, but for something simpler, something that was his. As the fire died to embers, he leaned back the chair, groaning, rubbing the ache in his temple. You believe this, Rex? The bureaucracy might just finish what the war couldn't. The dog shifted, his tail giving a single heavy thump, as if he understood the dark humor. A faint smile touched Ethan's lips as he bent to ruffle the fur behind Rex's ears. You're worth it, buddy. He returned to the fight. He detailed vet visits, training protocols, feeding regimens, and enclosure specifications. In every blank that asked for a name, he filled it in with reverence. Underhandler, he printed his own neat and steady. Ethan M. Ward. The hours bled together. The fire faded to glowing coals, but neither the man nor his dog broke their vigil. Outside, the world was swallowed by a deep, quiet dark. But inside the scratch of pen on paper was the room's only heartbeat. When he finally paused, his gaze fell to the shepherd asleep at his feet. They think you're some wild animal, he murmured. And maybe you are. But you're my wild animal. Rex cracked open an eye, a silent acknowledgement of the vow, then let it drift shut again. The clock on the wall had ticked past midnight before Ethan finally set the pen down. He gathered the forms, squared them into a neat, defiant stack, and set them by the telephone. Tomorrow he would call the county. Tomorrow he would begin the battle to make this sacred bond official. But for tonight he reached down his hand, resting on the dog's broad back. Beneath his palm he felt the unwavering beat of a powerful heart. A true soldier's heart, resolute and unyielding. The storm outside began to rage again, but the little cabin held its ground warm and alive with a quiet, fierce purpose. October fell on Bozeman early that year, cloaking the valley in a tapestry of gold and biting frost. The air had sharpened to a point that stung the lungs, each breath a mix of pine and cold, damp earth. By late afternoon, a low wind tumbled down from the Bridger Mountains, stripping the last amber leaves from the aspens around Ethan Ward's cabin. He'd spent the morning shoring up the fence line and stacking the final cords of firewood against the coming winter. Rex shadowed his every move, his frame now filled out, though his heart was still young. A powerful build of muscle, a thick sable coat darkening along his spine, and eyes the color of aged whiskey burning with a sharp intelligence. It was nearing dusk when a profound silence settled over the forest, a stillness that made Ethan pause. No birdsong, no chattering squirrels, only the wind's low hum. Then he heard it, a faint rising wail of sirens from the road far below. He tensed. Sirens were a bad omen out here. A moment later, the old landline on the wall shrieked, shattering the quiet. He snatched it up. It was his neighbor, Tom Weaver. Ethan, you hearing this? Tom's voice crackled heavy with concern. A kid's gone missing, 7 years old. Noah Henderson. He wandered off from the schoolyard right by the North Woods. Ethan's chest tightened. How long ago? An hour, maybe more. The sheriff's organizing volunteers at the school. I'll head there, Ethan said. He hung up, grabbing his worn field jacket, and whistled for Rex. The shepherd came at once, his tail held stiff, sensing the sudden urgency. But before Ethan had even reached his old truck, Rex froze, his ears pricked, nostrils flaring. A low, menacing growl rumbled deep within his chest. And then, without warning, he bolted toward the forest line. Rex! Ethan yelled, breaking into a desperate sprint. Heel! But the dog didn't listen. Rex vanished among the trees, his bark echoing back, a deep, urgent cadence so different from his normal calls. Ethan knew that sound instantly. It was a series of sharp barks followed by 2 short pauses. A canine distress call, a code Rex had never ever been trained to know. Yet somehow he knew it by instinct. Branches lashed at Ethan's face while he followed. His breath plumed in the cold air. He stumbled over roots ducked under branches, his calls echoing unanswered. "Rex, come!" Still nothing, just the fading bark up ahead. And then another sound beneath the echo, a faint trembling cry. It was a child's voice. Ethan burst into a small clearing, his heart hammering against his ribs. The earth fell away into a ravine scattered with fallen logs and rain-slicked ferns. There, at the base of a pine, sat the boy, no more than 7 years old, his knees hugged tight to his chest. His small face was streaked with dirt and tears. He was missing one sneaker and the other was soaked. His thin jacket was torn, and standing guard between the boy and the dark woods beyond was Rex. The German shepherd stood unmoving, his stance wide, the fur on his back raised. His eyes were fixed on the dark thicket behind the child, from where the faint sound of a low growl was carried on the wind. Wolves. Ethan dropped to one knee next to the boy, his voice soft. "Hey, buddy, you're safe now. You're all right." The small boy looked up, his eyes wide and glistening with tears. "He found me," the boy stammered. "The dog, he wouldn't let me move." Ethan put a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Good thing he did." Ethan glanced at Rex, speaking low. "What do you see, buddy?" Rex's tail flicked just once, a silent signal. His ears remained aimed at the thicket. The growls faded, replaced by the crunch of retreating paws in the undergrowth. Only then did Rex ease his guarded stance. He glanced back at Ethan, as if to give the all-clear. Ethan then checked the boy's leg. A shallow cut traced a line along his calf. Painful, but not serious. "Think you can walk?" he asked. The boy just shook his head. "It hurts." "All right," Ethan said softly, sliding his arms under the child. "We'll get you out of here." He lifted him easily, an old motion learned from carrying the wounded as a Marine. "Secure steady." He spoke quietly. "You're doing fine, kid. What's your name?" "Noah," the boy whispered. "Noah Henderson." Ethan managed a faint smile. "Good name. I'm Ethan. This fella here is Rex." Rex moved in close, nudging his leg in silent reassurance. His eyes, however, never left the trail behind them. The 3 of them started back through the woods, which somehow seemed much darker now. The cold felt more piercing. Each snap of a twig echoed louder than it should have. About halfway back, they finally met the first search team, 2 deputies and a volunteer. One of them was Deputy Mara Jensen, a woman in her late 20s with auburn hair pulled back, and eyes that held both toughness and compassion. She was a Bozeman local, born and raised, known for her composure under pressure, and a quiet kindness she showed the locals. But when she saw the small boy in Ethan's arms, she stopped dead. Oh, thank God. You found him." "Not me," Ethan breathed, gesturing to Rex. "He did." Mara sank beside the boy, a wave of pure relief washing over her. "Hey, little one, you're safe now." She looked to Ethan. "We've been out here for hours. We were just about to push the search line north." Ethan gently set Noah down. Rex nosed the boy's hair, then sat panting heavily, but ever watchful. Mara smiled, reaching to pet him, but Rex only held her gaze, completely still. "Still on duty, I see," she murmured. "Always," Ethan answered. The deputies' radios crackled with the news, their voices crackings with emotion. "We have the boy. He's alive. I repeat, he is alive and safe." By the time they hit the forest's edge, the schoolyard below was a chaos of flashing lights and frantic movement. Parents, neighbors, and officers all holding their breath. As Ethan broke through the tree line with Noah, a raw cheer went up. The boy's mother, her blonde hair wild and her face streaked with tears, surged forward, enveloping her son in a desperate hug. Ethan faded back, giving them their moment. Rex sat at his side, ribs heaving, his tongue lolling from the effort. Sheriff Ben Carlson himself came over, an older man whose steady walk and kind eyes showed he'd seen it all, but hadn't lost his faith in people. "Ward," he said, offering his hand. "That's one hell of a partner you've got there." Ethan gave it a firm shake. He was just following his instincts. "Maybe," the sheriff mused, looking at Rex. "But I have a feeling it's more than that." Nearby, Noah pointed to the shepherd, his voice shaking but clear. "He found me, and he kept everyone away until you got there." A hush fell over the crowd. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the boy's mother knelt down beside Rex, whispering thank you through her tears. The dog remained still, his blinks slow and deliberate, ever watchful. Luke Carter's police SUV rolled up minutes later, parking next to the sheriff's truck. He strode over quickly, surveying the scene. "So, he's the one who did it?" he asked. Ethan just nodded. "Saved the boy?" Luke glanced down at Rex, a slight smile touching his lips. "Guess that settles your paperwork, Marine." Ethan let out a quiet, tired laugh. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." The sheriff clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Bozeman owes you a debt, Ward, both of you." As the sun finally sank behind the mountains, the field slowly emptied out. Search teams packed their gear, the noise giving way to the hum of crickets and whispering grass. Ethan crouched, meeting Rex's gaze. The dog was still panting, his paws caked in mud and dirt, but his eyes were clear, filled with a quiet pride. "You did good, soldier," Ethan whispered. Rex leaned his weight in, pressing his head hard against Ethan's arm. As they finally began the long walk home, a vast, calm night settled over them. Far behind them, the last siren's cry faded on the wind, and though no words were exchanged between man and dog, they both knew something inside them had shifted. The bond forged in the crucible of survival had just become legend. The story of the boy in the woods swept through Bozeman like a wildfire. By sunrise, the whole town was talking about the Marine's dog who found the lost boy when no one else could. The following morning, a small crowd had already gathered outside the sheriff's office. Locals stood with coffee cups, speaking in hushed tones. Some wanted to see the dog. Others just had to see if the story was real. Ethan Ward was not a man who sought the spotlight. For years, he'd lived in quiet isolation, hidden away in his mountain cabin. A man who found comfort in solitude. But now, stepping from his truck, Rex, a steady shadow beside him, he saw people wave, their faces breaking into smiles, some even clapping. It was a strange, humbling, and deeply overwhelming shift. Inside the sanctuary of the sheriff's office, Lieutenant Luke Carter was waiting. He was an unchanging landmark, tall, broad-shouldered, his blonde hair cut to the unforgiving lines of regulation. His gaze was steady, but a quiet pride softened the edges. His navy uniform, though immaculate, carried faint creases and a whisper of mountain dust, the telltale signs of a man who never truly stood down. "Morning, Marine," Luke greeted, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Morning, Lieutenant." Ethan returned his nod, a mark of deep respect. Beside him, Rex sat at perfect attention, his eyes sharp and ever watchful. Rex was a statue of discipline at his side, posture, rigid eyes scanning the room. Luke gestured to a nearby chair. "Have a seat. Sheriff Carlson and I wrapped the report last night. Figured you'd want to hear this directly from us." Ethan pulled a chair close, his hand coming to rest on Rex's powerful back. The dog leaned into the touch, a silent exchange of reassurance. Calm, but ever watchful. Luke opened a worn manila folder. "We're classifying Rex under a new designation, Rehabilitated Working Dog. It's an official recognition that he's an animal with a history of trauma, now retrained for civilian life. You'll be officially listed as his handler and legal guardian, protected under veteran rehabilitation privileges." A slight frown creased Ethan's brow. "Is that actually a thing?" Luke allowed himself a small, knowing grin. "It is now. Sheriff Carlson signed off on it. I made the call to the state veterinarian's office personally. The paperwork will take a few weeks, but effective today. He is officially off the unlicensed list." Ethan let out a slow breath, a heavy, unseen weight finally lifting from his soul. "You pulled some strings," Ethan stated quietly. Luke just shrugged. "I filed the truth. That's the job." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. "You know, it's not every day I get to write heroic act on an official incident report." A faint smile touched Ethan's lips. "He did all the work." "Maybe," Luke countered. "But someone had to teach him how to trust again." Before Ethan could form a reply, the office door swung open and Deputy Mara Jensen walked in. She carried a thermos and 2 paper cups. Still dressed in her field jacket, her auburn hair was pulled back from a face, dusted with freckles. Deep exhaustion shadowed her eyes, but it couldn't extinguish the warmth in her smile. "Morning, gentlemen. Figured you two could use some real coffee. The stuff from the machine just tastes like despair." Luke chuckled, accepting a cup. "Thanks, Jensen." Her gaze fell to Rex, who observed her with quiet intensity. "So this is the hero, huh?" Ethan nodded slowly. "He doesn't seem to know it." Mara lowered herself slightly, her movements slow and deliberate, telegraphing calm. "Hey, big guy," she murmured softly. Rex leaned forward to sniff her offered hand, giving a single brief wag of his tail before resuming his post. It was a clear acknowledgement, but duty always came first. Luke's eyes moved between them. "We're putting together a small recognition ceremony for this afternoon. It was the sheriff's idea. Nothing elaborate, just a few words, a certificate. He thinks the town could use a reason to feel hopeful for a change." Ethan shifted in his seat, the idea clearly unsettling him. "I'm not exactly built for ceremonies." Luke's mouth quirked into a smirk. "Don't worry, Marine. You just need to stand there and look uncomfortable. Rex will handle the rest." And by that afternoon, the town square was a sea of faces. There were families, local reporters, and a handful of old veterans in faded caps. A warm autumn sun bathed the courthouse steps where a small podium stood waiting. Sheriff Ben Carlson, a tall and solid presence in his tan uniform, stepped up to the microphone. His calm, steady voice carried over the hushed crowd. "We live in a world," he began, "that too often forgets about quiet courage. But this past week, courage took the form of a dog who refused to be broken, and a Marine who refused to let him fight that war alone." A wave of applause rippled through the crowd. Rex tilted his head, ears alert. Ethan stood beside him in his faded brown field jacket, his posture rigid, his eyes cast downward. Carlson continued, "Rex's action saved the life of young Noah Henderson. Because of this, he is being formally recognized as a rehabilitated working dog under the sole care of Mr. Ethan Ward. Some might call him a hero. Others might just call him what he truly is. A good soldier." At the prompt, Ethan stepped forward, grasping the sheriff's hand. The certificate was simple, just ink on heavy paper, but his own hands trembled as he accepted it. He wasn't accustomed to this kind of honor. Not for acts of peace, anyway. When he faced the microphone, the crowd quieted. Rex sat at attention by his feet, head up, tail still upon the ground. Ethan cleared his throat. His voice, when it emerged, was low, but solid. "I've served with men who would walk through hell for each other. Loyalty like that isn't given. It's forged in pain, trust, and time. This dog..." He looked down at Rex. "He is that same kind of soldier. He didn't save that child because he's an animal. He did it because somewhere in his chest beats the same heart I've seen on the battlefield. A soldier's heart." For a long moment the silence was absolute. Then the applause returned, stronger this time, filled with a genuine warmth. Later that evening, after the ceremony faded and the town square emptied, Ethan and Rex walked back toward the truck. Kids had swarmed them earlier, wanting pictures, calling Rex their hero dog, offering him bits of jerky and pats on his weary head. One little girl had pressed a handmade charm into Ethan's hand. It was a small wooden heart, painted blue with the word "brave" carved into it. He secured it to Rex's collar before starting the drive home. When they arrived at the cabin, the twilight had softened to a deep amber. Ethan lifted the garage door, revealing a space he had completely transformed. The workbench was gone, making way for a large kennel lined with new blankets and toys, and a small American flag. The Marine Corps emblem was mounted just above it. Rex paced inside, inspecting every corner, then circled once before finally laying his body down. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, just watching. "You've got better quarters than I do," he said softly. Rex lifted his head, tongue lolling his tail, beating a slow rhythm on the concrete. Ethan chuckled. "Don't get too comfortable. Soldier, we still have training at dawn." He switched off the lights, leaving only the faint, warm glow from the wood stove spilling in. Outside, the moon cut a sharp silver line over the ridge, but inside, the cabin felt fuller than it had in years. It was no longer just a structure, but a home. And while the world beyond held its noise, its demands, its judgments, here in this quiet corner of Montana, 2 soldiers, 1 man, 1 dog, had finally been given recognition, not by way of medals or praise, but through the simple, profound truth of being seen and understood. The years passed like a quiet breath over the valley. Seasons turned in their silent cadence, leaving their mark on the snow. The pines and the faces of those who had endured. In the hills above Bozeman, Ethan Ward's cabin still stood against the elements, its cedar walls darkened by weather and steeped in memory. The man himself had weathered too. Older, a bit slower, but no less resolute. His hair was now silver at the temples, and the lines etched into his face told a deeper story. But his gaze held a quiet strength, a stillness forged in the crucible of war, and tempered by the solitude of peace. He carried both burdens, and beside him, Rex had matured into his full majesty. At 8 years old, he was a powerful sight, a German shepherd in his prime. His black and tan coat gleamed under the high sun. His muscles rippled with a quiet, contained strength, and his movements carried a seasoned grace. Yet his deep amber eyes still burned with that same intelligent, watchful fire that once saved a boy's life. He no longer barked without reason. He didn't have to. The forest itself knew him. Every morning before dawn, the man and his dog ran the same snow-packed trail down to the frozen creek and back again. Ethan's breath clouded the air, his boots crunching the frost. Rex ran just a bit ahead, glancing back every few moments to ensure his man followed. Sometimes they paused on the ridge where the Bridger Mountains first caught the light of day, standing side by side, watching the sunrise spill over the peaks like fading embers. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was a deep understanding. Then one day in late autumn, as the sky turned gray and the air bit with the coming snow, an unexpected visitor arrived. A small sedan struggled up the winding dirt road to his cabin, its tires sliding on the damp leaves. From it emerged Sarah Collins, older now, her auburn hair streaked with silver gray, but her posture was still upright and confident. The same gentle strength that had once soothed scared animals still carried in her voice. She wore a dark green wool coat and leather gloves, and her smile was warm but inquisitive. "Ethan Ward," she said, as he stepped onto his porch, both surprised and pleased. "I just had to see him again." Ethan offered a slow, genuine grin. "He's right here." Rex appeared in the doorway, giving one slow wag before approaching her. Sarah crouched down to meet him, rubbing behind his powerful ears. "My God," she whispered in awe. "He's magnificent." "He's still himself," Ethan replied. "Just bigger, stronger, smarter, and a whole lot more stubborn." She looked up at him then. That's what happens when you give something wild a reason to stay put. Inside, by the soft crackle of the fire, they shared coffee. Sarah talked about her years at the Wildlife Rescue Center, how the bureaucracy had gotten heavier, how she missed the days when saving a life didn't mean filling out 50 forms. But seeing him, she set her gaze on Rex dozing by the fire. "Reminds me of why I started." Ethan chuckled quietly. "He still scares the hell out of the mailman, if that helps balance things." Sarah laughed. "Good. Keeps the legend alive." They talked about the town, the mountains, and the few who remembered. Before she left, Sarah walked over to Rex, kissed the top of his head, and said softly, You were always more than just a rescue. Weren't you? After she drove away, Ethan sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the pines. Rex came and joined him, laying his heavy head on Ethan's knee. The first flakes of snow began to drift down, settling softly on Rex's dark fur. Ethan brushed them away gently. "You know," he said quietly, "they used to call you a stray, said you were wild and dangerous. Couldn't be tamed." Rex raised his head, his ears twitching at the sound of his voice. Ethan smiled faintly. "But I think you just saw it differently. You chose. You chose loyalty over being free, didn't you? You chose home." The dog's intelligent eyes met his gaze, steady, warm, and unflinching. Then, with a soft groan, Rex laid his head back down on Ethan's leg, utterly content as the dusk gathered. Far below, the town lights trembled tiny embers of gold against the chill. Ethan watched faint silhouettes drift down Main Street, faces that had become familiar. Children would wave as they passed his trail, their voices carrying the words, "Hero Dog." Old friends like Tom Weaver still made the climb, bringing smoked venison or fresh tools, always ending with a soft pat for Rex and a firm handshake for Ethan. In Bozeman, the two of them had become a living symbol, no longer just a spectacle, but a quiet testament that even shattered pieces can choose to remain whole. That winter bit deeper than most, swallowing the fence lines and wrapping the forest in a heavy, muffled silence. Ethan carved paths through the snow between the cabin, the garage, and the woodshed, with Rex trailing dutifully behind him, occasionally plunging his nose into a drift just for the sound of Ethan's laugh. Even on the most unforgiving days, they ran their trailman and dog, leaving their story in the frozen earth. Then, on Christmas Eve, Claire Donovan, the wildlife photographer from years before, made her way up the winding mountain road. She'd become a published photojournalist, renowned for capturing the soul of Montana's backcountry. Her long, dark hair was woven into a braid, and her green eyes held the same quiet strength he'd never forgotten. She carried her camera bag and a thermos of hot cider. "I was in the area shooting the elk migrations," she said, a warm smile spreading. "Couldn't leave without checking on the legend." Ethan welcomed her into the warmth. For an hour she photographed Rex by the hearth, capturing the firelight dancing on his coat and the unwavering way his gaze tracked Ethan's every move. "He's aged like a general," she murmured. Just before she left, she showed Ethan the images on her camera's screen. One made his breath catch in his throat. It was Rex on the porch, snowflakes dusting his graying muzzle, the Marine Corps flag hanging a faint echo in the background. "That one," Ethan said, his voice low and heavy. "That's who he is." Months later, that very photo appeared in a national magazine. The title read, "The Wild That Stayed." The caption told their story, a former military K-9 and his Marine handler who found their peace together in the wild mountains of Montana. When the magazine reached Bozeman, the townsfolk began framing copies, hanging them proudly in their small shops and local diners. People started to offer a respectful nod when they saw Ethan in town. He never boasted. He didn't need to. The story no longer belonged to him alone. One evening in late autumn, a hard wind swept down from the north, rattling the cabin windows. Ethan sat on the porch once more, the air sharp with our coming of snow. Rex was beside him, his breathing slow and deep. The silver had now claimed most of his muzzle, but his posture was still undeniably proud. Around his neck, his old collar held a single tag tarnished by time, but unbroken, engraved with 4 words, "Rex Ward, never left behind." Ethan's voice was a soft whisper on the wind. "They said you were wild once. They weren't wrong. But maybe wild doesn't mean broken. Maybe it just means you're free to choose where you belong." Rex lifted his great head, pressing his muzzle gently into the palm of Ethan's hand, his old eyes shining in the amber glow from the porch light. In the valley, a new dawn began to break, painting the Bridger Mountains in gold. Another day was waiting for them, another run, another quiet morning standing together side by side. And when the people in Bozeman spoke of the Marine and his dog, they no longer called them rescues. They called them what they truly were: two souls once lost, who had finally found their way home. A quiet reminder that the greatest miracles don't always arrive with thunder or with light. They arrive on four silent paws, eyes ever watchful, with a love that knows no conditions. Rex was once a soul lost to the world. He was lost and broken, but through compassion he found purpose, and in healing him, Ethan found his own redemption. Their bond is a testament that faith isn't what we demand, but who is sent to stand with us in the shadows when we need them most. Sometimes kindness is the one miracle someone is praying for, a gentle word, an understanding heart, or courage to shield the defenseless. These are how we bring light to shadows. If this story touched your heart, share their story so others might believe again in the miracle of devotion. Comment Amen if you believe God still moves through the bond between humans and animals. And may blessings find every single person watching. Like, subscribe, and join us for more stories of enduring faith, hope, and the powerful ways God proves to us we are never truly alone.